Occident, November 4th, 1872. Most sophomorical Sir, your Greco-Latin epistolat, or Kabbalistical abracadabra, lies before me, deciphered and eclaircized to the best of my linguistic, passographical, and exegetical ability. As a merited castigation, therefore, and to test your wonted longanimity, I shall recalcitrate by affunding upon you, in epistolic form, my scaturient cornucopia of lexiphanic sesquipedalities, Johnsonian archaisms, exoticisms, neologianisms, patavinities, et id genus omne. In former epistolary scribblements, I gave you the concatenation of concomitant circumstances initiatory to my transmigration to this remote section of the occidental portions of our Colombian Republican coagination. I have also delineated my periculous adventures among the fucated rubicund autochthons, or aborigines, portrayed various incidents of venations in which I participated, minorating regal aggregations of bison and antelope capridae, which abound on the gramineous oxiduous plateaus, depicted my primal vision of the elusive phenomenal mirage and the fata morgana, and in verity recounted much of my vicissitudinous experience whilst with the caravan traversing the occidental champaigns. I am, however, not oblivious of the fact that when we imparted mutual valedictory congees, I laid myself under obligations to give you a pantographical delineation of the ponent regions upon which I might cast my ophthalmic organs. As it would be a delusive devagation from my customary routinism to comprehendinate the fulfillment of my felicitations by procrastination or dereliction, I shall, deeming this a sufficence, proemuli or prolegomenarily, essay to further exonerate myself of said obligations, and imprimis give you a chorographical sketch of this part of our Hesperian domain, and a compendiarious enumeration of some of its autochthonal flora and fauna. The superficies of the occidental portion is diversified by many altitudinarian, terrene, lapidarious, and rupillary acroceronian montanic elevations, some of cyclopean vastidity and sublime scabridity. Their mirificent glacious pinnacles tower apparently above the nubiferous regions into the colliginous empyrean. The oriental portion is a vast undulating plateau, extremely longitudinal and latitudinous, having few exiguous dingles. Its terreous surface is covered with a most nutritious autochthonous xerophilous gramineous growth, principally Butyloa oligostachya, Buclo and Tripsicum dactyloides, mesquite and grama. This growth sustains equine, bovine, hircine, and ovine quadrupeds in a state of rotund impinguation during the entire hemal season. Artemisia tridentata, the Solisequius helianthus, aculeated cactus or puncher, and multifarious succulent acanthaceous and aciculated cactaceous plantage, and floriferous, herbaceous, and graminifolious garniture luxuriate in many localities. The fluvial meanders are limited, and originate from the liquefaction of the vast niveous and glacial accumulations in the montanic regions. None are nivigerous, but they are tritaceous and anatiferous. Some are pactolian, and all are extremely relucent, and possess a great degree of diaphaneity. None tardy in profluence. At many points, their rivages, especially in the vicinity of embouchures or disemboguements of arroyos, are replete with a promiscuity of asperifolious, buxiferous, or cocciferous, venaceous, arundinaceous, or other bushments. Myriads of venine, umbelliferous, corymbiferous, racemiferous, urticaceous, fructiferous, anthophorous, or floriferous plantage, and multifarious spontaneous esculent products also abound. The autochthonous arboreous growth consists of Acerrose sempervirent and Perdifolius silva and boskages, by no means of a main arduity, or totally devoid of adunsities, nodosities, and nags. Disboscation by succession and conflagrations will deplete same in the next decade. The reptatory, panigerous, bisulcus, and unguiculated feral entities of this domain are ouzels, ptarmigans, ortolans, leverocs, trochides, shelducks, cryos, cockops, creeples, crotalluses, carcajews, logamies, castors, marmots, malodorous marapots, spilligale, putorius, lepus campestris, ovis, montano, antilocapridae, bison, spermophiles, coyotes, grizzlus, ursus horribilis, and other animals of the murine, sirine, feline, canine, leporine, vulpine, lupine, ursine, cervine, caprine, ovine, and equine genus. Also, penipotent accipitrine and aquiline raptors. There are apparently interminable areas almost wholly monopolized by Cinemus ludovicianus. Viewing the ludicrous antics of these illusory sirine burrowing rodents in their circumcursations, or perched a la homo upon the apices of their coniform tumulosities, incessantly alliterating, one cannot control his risibles. The intermontane sections of this region are as auriferous and argentiferous as any of the austral, remote, austrine occidental, or extreme occidental and septentrional sections of this republican agenation. They are also foriferous, carboniferous, or anthraciferaous, plumbiferous, and cupriferous. The ubity or fecundity of the soil in these inhabitable sections, when properly stercorated and irrigated, exuperates aeration. Besides frumentarious products, which yield a most siliginose flour, there are produced in campastrian and olatory enclosures branch, citrals, sarmentaceous fragaria, cucurbitaceous, acetarious, fabaceous, and in verity multifarious oleraceous edibles. These are vast, arid, alkaligenous areas and arenarious adorations, multitudinous conglomerate buttes, and circumdenudated arenolitic elevations. Such areas, not being scaturiginous and arable, will ever be sparsely populated. The numerary majoration or crescive ditation of the terra tenants originates from agistment, coemption, and vendition of equine, bovine, and lanigerous ovine quadrupeds or rotherbeasts, from attention to geoponics or agronomy, from usurious contracts and usufructuary holdings, from enchantment in value of preempted terra firma, from Venetians agiotage, mining emperetical pursuits or mercature, and from general negotiations. The paucity of population in some localities possesses a consimilitude to a mere exiguity. The life of many is bucolic and nomadic. The oppidan and many volatic communities, the optimity of society prevails. However, the cordial compagination of so heterogeneous a mass and farraginous concurrence of all nationalities, as is the case in some localities, demands time. There must be a prior detruncation of the truculence and inurbanity of some of its divisions to obtain the optimity of society and secondation. Appetition for occupation, synergetics, electromachy, tauromachy, and circumforaneous avogations must undergo diminution. The concordance of the major portion of the occidental leod is by no means truculent, celestic, or immorigerous. Nevertheless, many are subtilous and have a great inhiation for captation, veneration, the coassevation of pelf, preemption and coemption of terra firma, and participating in festal jovialities. The ethics of many are greatly maculated by the rendition of vivacity, of aquavitae, localities replete with cades of aguardientia, popolo, skincum bub, are patrocinated by and thronged with bibbers, whose comates, condisciples, and competators are dolts, fanfarons, jobbernows, answerous nincompoops, maudlin gavilanses, temulant wantwits, linguacious barachios, and bateful barrators. They sometimes initiate their Saturnalian revelries with xerophagy, and the manducation of ragos, savoloi, and polony, to give an acumen to their gusto for the imbibition of inebriating potations. As a sequence, what stultiloquence, what random tentations at the annotation of some vulgar enigma, what perpetration and ruinous ebriety, what mutual pugnacity issuing in testy concertations and sanguinary pugilisms. Such rendezvous are terrestrial pandemoniums. Relative to myself, as you are cognizant, for some time subsequent to my decession from home, I sojourned with Agnatians and Cognations, who are amnicalists and engaged in terriculture or agriculation. The circumambient and circumjacent country is interamnian, nemorous, and paludal or palustral. My vocation was at first subtegulaneous and sedentary, but subsequently became wholly extraforaneous. Prior to becoming inured to a castrensial mode of life, I very injudiciously submitted to homicubations during pernoctations, which, during the initial part of my castramentarians and alfresco employment in connection with nocturnal irrorations, miasmatic exhalations, and the dankishness of the atmosphere generated by a want of apricity, were extremely febrifacient, causing tertiary quassation and febriculosity, infrigidation, formication, cardiology, allotriophagy, and womble, succeeded by calenture, found introgression into my corporeal organization. I was medicamentally aggravated by a rubiginous, charlatanical, anencephalous medicaster who, not being extrascient in ecology, iomatology, soteriology, pharmacodynamics, and in the impartation of acritics, ekphrastics, and other pharmacons, and moreover having erroneously diagnosticated my case, greatly minorated my eupepsy and occasioned me to spend many insomnious nights. In my brief swevens, I endured circumvallation of pigwidgeons, cacodemons, and audible simulacres in my harns. Upon these supervened synorexia, leucophlegmacy, turgid muns, and synchonism. I am now robust physically and sane mentally, or mens sana in corpore sano, with the exception of a slight odontalgia and cephalalgia, but not the slightest symptom of nostalgia. Eulogium to the supermundane powers for the revivification of my physical organization, and for my invalescence and complete analepsis by means of pyretics, cholagogics, peptics, anticorzotics, and other medicamenta. Also, balneotherapy, kinesiopathy or kinesiatrics, and migration to this salubrious clime. Since my ubication here, my functions have been bibliopilistical, bucolical, agronomical, piedeutical, or pedagogical and negotiatory. I have perorated the ponent regions quite extensively and have witnessed many peregrinities and neoteric occurrences. I will now terminate this protracted auto-schediastical scribblement by imparting to you the verity that as yet femininity has not parlously fascinated me, though I am not by any means a misogynist or a misogamist, but affected with neither gyneology or gynophobia, though somewhat of a philogynist, desiderating not to be gibed with connubial relations, I have come to the elation to be the sole vagant yet many annuary epochs. I shall offer no exculpation for hieroglyphic chirography, auto-schediastical orthology, cacography, and cacology, but leaving it to you to decipher, etymologize, and eclaircise to the best of your lexicographical, lexicological, orismological, and philological ability. I am, most lexiphanically, your quondam condisciple, Ivan. Right. Right, shall I continue with this second one or not? Right. Okay, letter 2. Mirage Plateau, Occident, December 3rd, 1872. Most automathic and glottological sir, in my prevenient categoristical epistolographical missile, I essay to portray to you the chorography of this portion of the Ponent regions. My present elucubration shall be narratory of incidents in my checkered experience here. The caravan with which I traversed the Occidental Plateau reached its destination during the canicular days. Here, subsequent to the tarriance of several heptamods, having an appetency to perlustrate the Hesperian domain still further, I entered into a factitious agreement as peripatetic itinerant bibliopole. This was quite consentaneous with my nature, for, as you know, from my earliest juvenility, I have been an ardent bibliophilist. Receiving a compendiarius prospectus, I prolated valedictions to my compagnons de voyage and inchoated solivagant perambulations. I now realized the fact that I was in a peregrine land, unkent, a friend, a peripatetic pedestrious viator, and apparently isolated with the salvo of a canine quadruped whose mordacious, latrant, lusorious, and fanatic qualities are without parity. Sicurated and divested of his acharnement and cursedness, he has been of great utility to me in his indagation of game, in the latitations, latibulums or hibernaculums, and for his pervigilations. By his Serbian latrations, he has kept in abeyance the whole noctivagant furacious race, especially during the nocturnal hours. I honorated my dorsal part with a portmanteau for the vectation of my habiliments, my humeral or acromial projector. I also honorated with an instrument consisting of ligneous stock and ferreous tube for the enocation of aligerous and volant bipeds, and those animals that are given to latrociny, or a predaceous life. With this armature and accoutrements, I took up my line of march in a septentrio-occidental direction for distant Oppidan and Velatic communities. Amplifying claritude occupied the argent fields above. Human, Belguine, and other entities sustained the radiating caloric of Phoebus. Exhilarating euphony seemed to possess entire ubiquity. Under this buoyant physical revivification, I transcended acclivities and declivities until the rayonant solar luminary had attained meridional arduity, pouring down upon me his calefactory radiations, so that my corporeal organization was in totality subjected to redundant sudations, necessitating me to bring my bombicinous sudory into frequent requisition. After having participated in a collation, I submitted my corporeity to quiescence in a resupine position, which proved very acopic and effectuated an instauration of my physical energies. Having indulged in something like pandiculation, at least a sort of involuntary calisthenical exercise, I resumed the elongation of my pedaneous locomotion and protracted it till past crepuscule. Thus ended my primal days in itineration, varied by a multiplicity of peregrinities and neoteric occurrences. But oh, my defetigation and the turgescence of my Bedalian extremities! The cataphracted epidermal integument abraded from my malleolar processes and calcaneal protrusions, my sinistral tendo Achilles and the dorsal part of my dextral hallux extensively vesicated and excoriated. But the initial part of all enterprises is arduous. Subsequently to a very sumptuous vespertine repast, I intimated to a caterer for human and bovine animality that, feeling quite superlatively alembated and being somewhat somniculous, I was propense to an early couchee, and requested that he indigitate to me a cubicular department or dormitory in which I might enjoy somniferous quietude. I elicited from my host an obstruction to cause my expiration when the calligation of the night was yielding to the clarity of the remiant exhortive solar sphere. Prior to decumbency on my couch, I submitted my pedal and crural organs to a defecation by a copious lavation with medicated saponaceous abstergence. This pediluvian ablution, though I yet suffered a slight velication in my femoral organs, gave me a proclivity for an indulgence of my somnolency without intercession. In the matin, according to Pachin, the aubergiste exsuscitated me at first canorous peal of the chanticleer. After the customary matutinal manal and facial ablution, and abstersion and capital pectination, and a very satisfactory impletion of my epigastric receptacle, I asked for a supputation with him, and having duly adjusted the same, I resumed my ambulatory incession. The ceruleus canopy was merging into fulgidity from the ascending rayonant phoebus. Every entity about me seemed to revel in universal resuscitation. I performed my quotidian locomotion for several diurnal revolutions, witnessing a multiplicity of occurrences homologous to those already specified. One day, when the solar sphere had culminated, I, being much exanthellated from continuous deambulation, gave way to a recubation under an isolated multiramus umbrageous tree, contiguous to the trail, for the purpose of exercising my masticators upon the contents of my viaticum. Having furnished refocillation to my system, recumbent on my dorsal part, I viewed the plumous tenants of the air in their evolutions among the ramifications of the tree, and the elusive mirage in the distance. Having discalcated, I perfricated my recrudescent and attrited pedal organs with an iatroleptical cerate, and then, becoming profligated with somnolency, I soon relapsed into a postprandial siesta. Schnell, for that was the cognomination of my canine companion and presidiary, advigilated. I was, however, soon suscitated by an electrical detonation from the septentrional part of the horizon. So soon as my ophthalmic organs had undergone patafaction, I realized that nubiferous gales were in operation, agglomerating a most ominous and impendent circumcirrostratus thunderhead. The welkin was rapidly obnubulating and tenebrosity amplifying. The crispexulcations and furcations of the fulgurations became vivid, and the fulminations horricinous. In the brevity of time, there was a copious precipitation of pluvious globules, which subjected me and Schnell to thorough matafaction. The arroyos assumed such ampliations as might be styled a local torrential cataclysm. Aqueous domination prevailed on earth. Igneous puissance and fulminous reverberations predominated in numiferous regions, and a resistless ventosity maintained horrendous boations in the atmosphere. The fulgurations communicated their igneous potency to a rancho sans parateneris, setting in it flagration, terminating in entire incineration. Being untenanted, no one fell a prey to cremation. I and Schnell had to engage in the transilience and tranation of several arroyos, which greatly augmented the ponderosity of our envelopes. Ultimately, as the day began to advesperate, but prior to the cadence of Phoebus, with pedal envelopes and the inferior portion of my femoral habiliments subjected to quite an elutation, I arrived at an adobe chalet. Anthracitic and ligneous combustibles were deposited in a spacious calefactor and accended with an allumette, giving me an opportunity for torrefaction or divaporation. I was soon to the refectory by tintinnabular reverberations, where I found ample sanitary refreshments. Tenebrosity having by this time encircled our moiety of this mundane sphere, I soon sank into the gremium of Morpheus. The day subsequent to the Procelas Vesper, on which I effectuated the arefactional calefaction of my habiliments, was not very inservient to the progress of a pedestrious viator. It is true, the atmospheric regions, at first subnuvular, soon became ennubilated, and old Sol did not radiate his sudorific caloric so potently as on the hesternal day. But the roads had in some places become lutulent and somewhat clarty, presently presenting a great difficilitation to my incessive velocity on account of the viscosity of the surface. In consequence of my frequent stoppages, on account of the luterious and salubrious condition of the trail, I had an ample opportunity to exercise my optics upon the aspects of the circumjacent regions. The sinuosities of the vales, the rupillary cannons, the titanic Cerberus, nival-crested Aeonian mountain peaks, the ferocity of the terrareous surface pertingent to the aqueous meanders, excited in me the greatest oblectation. I arrived one day at a place somewhat multifarious, and there, being no miliaries or odometrous stones, I soon became disoriented. In the course of my deambulations, my vision was regaled with an oxyduous floriferous savanna, having in its septentrional, oriental, and austral sections a slight subsidency. Its terreous surface was a perfect chasm, wholly non-scatebrous. In my transcursion to a designated point, my attention was arrested by the audition of a very puissant sibilation in great proximity to Schnell. He gave a subcutaneous resilience. By chari perscrutation, I perceived a physilingual batrachophagus, anguine creeple, a crudulus, circularly recumbent. His cutaneous envelope was squamous, cupreous, and fulgid. His caudal extremity was cuspidated with the corneous apex. Schnell made a temerarious supersalient assault upon him, but received such a scissorary upon his rhinal protrusion as immediately induced incessant jactitation. Tumefaction, with ineffable celerity, became visible in his physical organization. Being somewhat scient in toxicology and pantagruelism, I administered to him, in the utmost brevity of time, alexitherics, antiphlogistics, and other pharmacy. This treatment produced immediate detumescence and revalescence. Though this assault upon him did not prove exicial, yet, in his resilience from the depasse, he suffered the exarticulation, or rather the subluxation of his sinistral crural organ, which, in his subsequent circumcursations, extorted the most streperous ejaculations. He soon, however, enjoyed complete sanation, and was freed from every traumatic vestige, and relieved of all osteoscope by a nepenthe and analgesics. His subastral vitality has, however, since terminated. Fritz, a Castrensian acolythist of mine, an ardent lover of synergetics and occupation, made a teraplegistic venatorial tour, and induced Schnell to accompany him. On the succeeding matin, as they were appropinquiating a lapidus and scopulous elevation, Schnell, in his circumcursations ventre à terre, was elected by the fumet of a cache. He there, Habnab, met a hirsute, hippophagus, sarcophagus, ichthyophagus, mellifagus, insectivorous, vermivorous, frugivorous, and anthropophagus ursine quadruped. A terrific sanguinary synatomy ensued. In the circumgyrations of the batalents, Schnell rendered Bruin excordate, but Bruin, being unguiculated, seized Schnell with one paw by the neb and submaxillary appendage in the hyomental region, and with the other grasped his capillodermal integument in the lateral part, and almost exenterated him, and quite suggulated him. By an extracanadus, Schnell effected his eluctation from Bruin, but through hors de combat, his claudication from the arena of concertation or obluctation prompted the most puissant ululations. The lancinations maugre all epilotic, cadagmatic, and cicatricive appliances. And all available asiurgical and chirurgical skill sfacilated interosseal and cervical intergescence induced angina, terminating in lethality. He was contumelated thoroughly. After the defecation or deperdition of Schnell, being a hippophile, and cognizant that equitation is salutiferous, and having by a series of operose bibliopolistic conati congested an inadequacy of pecunious ability to effectuate the emption of at least a yard, I came to the elation to be no longer a peripatetic pedestrian. Just such an equinal servitor as I desiderated was indigitated to me. He was dandering for population on the verdant jerse of a branch. Such another caballine quadruped never inspired aerial fluid. He was as obese and glabrous as a foursome. Still, he had a great inhiation for arenaceous granules. He was perfectly mansuet and free from calcitration in any attractation and contractation of him, with the exception of the taction of Clegg's. Free from titubation, vesignon, and other defectuosities, his tolutation and his cursorial deliverness or panicity on the cesspidus champagne are without equipolency or parity. I essayed to bring about an emption of this monsieur, and persolved therefore by the offer of a considerable numerary consideration and a hypothecation or opinioration of my fusee and argental horologe. He was not emptionable. After hospitating for a noctitudinal tidial period with a Vacoro, I entered into a factitious contract with him. During my terrosony as a Vacoro, though not a novice in equitancy and riding tantivy, yet in segregating and curling macrocornus bovines for inostrian in omnium gatherum aggregations or rodeos, and in aggregating mavericks my equestrian acrobatics feats, vaulting from the dorsal part of bucking broncos was for a time truly mirabile visu. Eventually, in view of the avalation or evanescence of the estival and autumnal seasons and the approximation of brumal gelidity and cadent niveus particles, and moreover, being ruriculist rather than an oppidan, I entered in a paction with an assiduous proprietor of a section of terra firma. In conclusion, I have today felt somewhat writative, and hence my present epistolizing is voluminous as Thucydides, and strung out like the caudal appendage of Alcibiades canine. I have epistophagorized much postulated emendatory criticisms here and there, and added so much paraphrastical marginalia that verily redilet lucerne. With the customary comity, Ivan.